I'm Ronna Stuller. I'm a founding member of the Riverside Park Conservancy. There's a sign-up sheet and some information about our upcoming festival and about our organization on the table. So sign in, whatever, but give us your email address if you want to be on our email list. Now for the intro part. Joan Cooper and I went to a presentation in Mystic last spring that was sponsored by Clean Up Sound and Harbors, and Mike Nadeau was the speaker. And we decided that that a lot of the information he had would be really pertinent to many properties in New London that have been neglected for a long time, and whose neglect in many ways impacts the Thames River and the Long Island Sound that we abut. So we asked him if he'd come to New London. He walked around a few sites in New London, and hopefully he'll talk about that a little bit. His background is that he spent over 30 years doing holistic and ethical land care. And I don't know, I'll let you speak for yourself about more of your experience, but we welcome you to New London, and we hope it's fun and,
thanks,
and fulfilling for
Thank
all.
you. Well, so far it's been fun. Thank you. All right, so I'm Mike Nadeau, and back in 1979, I got fired from my last landscape job because I couldn't take orders. And I started, I had a pickup truck, I had a rake, I had a lawnmower. I was going to become a landscaper, so that's what I did. And back then, that's all you needed, pretty much. And I planted lots of rhododendrons, I planted lots of invasive plants, not knowing there wasn't even that term back then. And I also got interested in pesticides, and I got licensed when I was 17 years old. I was the youngest licensed arborist in the state of Connecticut at the time, and that gave me the license to spray. So when you have an arborist license, it not only means that you know a little bit about trees, it also means that you are a loose cannon, and you can go out there and spray all this great stuff that they gave us. And then I went to school in the College for Plant and Soil Sciences, and the whole mantra was better living through chemicals. Back in those days, the Dow mantra was better living through chemicals. And that's what they taught us, and I learned how to control nature, I thought. And I came out of there more of a professional, I thought, and really went to work on my landscape business. And lo and behold, the more pesticide I applied, the more I needed to apply, and the more I needed to change them over and over again, because certain things were getting used to my application methods. So I noticed that on other landscapes, plants were looking a little bit better than mine. I was spraying a lot of things, killing a lot of bugs, and definitely applying a lot of fungicides. But there was this one house next door in particular where the trees were almost identical to the property I was taking care of. And the trees looked great, and they didn't do a damn thing to them. And mine were in decline. And I was also treating the lawn, which was a spoiled brat bluegrass lawn. And it just was a magnet for every disease and insect, and needed lots of fertilization. So I was caring for it, and it was that perfect emerald carpet. But every time it got a little dollar spot, a fusarium blight, I was out there with the fungicide. And I wouldn't just spray those spots, I'd spray the whole lawn, because that's how we did it back then. It was blanket applications all the time. Well, what I didn't know was the relationship between lots of fungi in the soil have made really good bedfellows with a lot of trees. So tree roots and fungi have grown symbiotic over the years, over the centuries and eons, and I was killing a lot of those beneficial fungi in the soil by killing the pathogenic fungi that were attacking the lawn. So although I was controlling the fungus that was trying to kill the bluegrass because it didn't belong there in the first place, I was also killing a lot of the fungi in the soil that were helping the trees to be healthy. So I'll talk a little bit about mycorrhizal fungi in the talk later and explain that a little bit more. So I started to notice the difference in the trees, and I figured, I'm fighting nature. How can I learn how to work with nature, and how, instead of fighting, trying to learn more about it? So by that time, environmental sciences had been invented. Back then, there was no such thing as ecology courses or any of that. It was conquer nature. So I started to learn a lot more about how to work with nature. I went down to Rodale, which was the only organic thing around. I really liked the whole idea of getting back to the way that my grandparents used to grow food and grow landscapes before pesticides, before World War II. So I went down to Rodale and I spent 4 months down there. And they were doing mostly food organically, but they had an organic lawn plot. And I went into that big time and worked with them for a while and came back with some more knowledge. But everybody knows if you have a little bit of knowledge, you're dangerous, very dangerous. So I figured, here I am, I'm a knowledgeable organic landscaper now, and I'm a zealot, and I'm out to save the world with your money. So I used to go to these clients and browbeat them into dropping the chemicals and going organic, and of course they dropped me quite a bit. And I scared them. I told them, you're going to get cancer, your dog's going to have 3 eyes, and your kids are going to die by 7. Although there's truth to all of that, a little bit, the fact of the matter is, you can't change a paradigm, on a dime. Things take a long, long time to change. So I learned a soft method, and then in 1982, my brother Danny was also landscaping for a tyrant, a really tough guy to work for, who I worked for before, who I got fired from. So my brother thought I was going to fall on my face. So by this time, he realized that I needed a lot of help. So he came and joined me as my partner back then. So from 1982 to a year ago, last August, I finally sold my business, and my brother is now the sole owner of it. So what has happened in that time is we have developed a method of thinking that was out of the normal range of what landscapers were doing back then. And it was simply not because I was creative or wanted to be different. I just couldn't compete with the Joe Schmo landscaper who was cutting lawns for $9 and $12 a lawn. And I figured I wanted to make a good living. If I wasn't going to make a good living, I'd go work for someone and get taken care of. So I wanted to do something that the other landscapers weren't doing. So one of the big things that people did not like to do was work in swamps and wetlands. And there was a lot of building going on in the 80s, as we all know. The builders had a lot more money than they had brains, a lot of them. And they would fill in wetlands, they'd cut down trees where they weren't supposed to, they'd do a lot of big mistakes. And the towns would catch them every now and then, and somebody would have to go in and remediate those wetland problems. So we developed a landscape restoration business. So I figured, let the other guys mow the lawns, let the other guys plant the rhododendrons and the azaleas. I'm going to do some cool stuff and get into restoration work. And from that, we got strongly into organics, because in wetlands you can't use any synthetics, and you can't use any fertilizers unless they're naturally derived and minimally used. So from that, I studied and learned and went to work for other people. And I was talking to some of the people here. I went out west and studied with Paul Stamets and learned about how to use mushrooms in the landscape, which I'll talk about a little bit. And so long story short, my brother and I developed this company into a landscape restoration business. And from that, we've carved out the niche of being the organic landscape restoration company, which is, what I sold to my brother last August. So that's a little bit of the where I've come from. There's a lot more in between the lines. I'm going to have my back to you often, because I'm going to be explaining what I see up there. And if there's any questions, please just holler out my name. My name is Mike. I answer to almost anything though, but Mike would be nice. Okay? So with that, we'll get going, unless anybody has any questions right off the bat. Okay. So this is my contact information if anybody needs it. I started a consulting business because I guess I can't sit still very long. Caroline knows that. So anyway, I got out of business to not have employees and payroll and all that stuff. And I've so far been able to stick to that. So anything I say is my opinion, okay, based on what I say. So if you have any, differences of opinion and you want to contact me later, that's wonderful. If you want to point it out to me now, that's wonderful. And if you have any questions later that come to mind, please, I'm accessible. Phone number's up there, and my email address, and my website. So what we're going to talk about here is how pollutants move around in an environment. What's the fate of various pollutants as they move around? Fresh versus saltwater pollutants, they're different. How to recognize potential problem areas in a landscape. Avoiding harmful land use decisions, that's a really important one because you might have a healthy piece of property. It's good to know that it's healthy and how to avoid making mistakes that you could pay for down the road. Runoff and erosion, how to remediate and restore. And use of plants as bioengineering materials. Advantages of soft engineering. That's another big thing that I was trying to stress today as we walked around these properties with the city engineer. Engineering is the ability to use a lot of man-made structures to solve problems. And oftentimes I think a chipmunk is, well, that's not going to be a good... So in other words, big things are used for little small problems. So you get a great big excavator on the site, and they dig great big holes, and they do a lot of disturbance, and then they put a lot of concrete and a lot of steel in the ground. And yes, it solves the problem, but you created 4 or 5 other ones along the way. Soil compaction, a lot more money, and so some projects don't even get done because they're too expensive to get started. So this whole idea of soft engineering is the new and upcoming engineering style. But what it really is what our parents and grandparents did before all of this fancy engineering came out. So I'm kind of ripping off the past and modernizing it up to today's standards. So the number one water quality problem in the U.S. is polluted runoff, and that's by the U.S. EPA. The number one problem is polluted runoff. And you can see the oil running off the parking lot right into that drain, and then you know it goes where it goes from there. So development, what we do is, this is a piece of land. What we do with land as human beings is we build on it. So we build structures. Structures happen to have roofs, and they have to have paving, and they have to have roads. All of that is impervious. So what happens is you minimize infiltration. So the water that falls on a piece of land when it's a forest almost all absorbs. Then you cut roads through the forest, put in driveways, install a bunch of houses, and plant grass, which a lot of people think grass is a good ground cover. It is in the right place, but under normal conditions with a 5-degree pitch, 85% of a rainstorm will run off a lawn, and only 15% will percolate. So in a forest, it's about 85 to 90% will soak in. So we lose the infiltration as we build, and then that causes water to run off. And runoff creates sediment. So we get the topsoil from the top, the best soil, ends up in places where we really don't want it, in water bodies and such. And here's a perfect example. So here's 2 different watersheds. Here's the Quinnipiac River coming down through here. Here's a watershed in white over in this area, and this one over here in red. So what happened is they tested after a large storm. They waited and waited. They set up all kinds of sensors along the Quinnipiac River and all the tributaries that went into the Quinnipiac River. And then they had a great big storm event. And what happened is that's the normal one, and that's the one in the red. So what happened over here in the green is you can see that the density of population, the red is the denser, and this dark spot is really dense population. Over here, this is mostly farmland. So almost exactly the same areas, here and here. The rain that fell identical on both of these spots. The water that came down rose up slowly and then went down slowly and went back to normal. But where there was a lot of impervious surface, the water went up, spiked like crazy, which caused flooding and erosion, and then went down really quickly. So there was no infiltration of the water. The water ran off. So from this watershed, being densely populated, we had this kind of a spike. And from this watershed over here, where there was mostly farmland, it was gradually absorbed back into the ground. So we're going to talk about some pollutants of concern, some big problems that we have. And look at this nice lawn over here. That's a pond. it's full of algae on the top. And the algae is caused by subdevelopment on this side where they have the perfect monoculture bluegrass lawns and lots of synthetic nitrogen and phosphorus being applied and running right across the road, right into that stream and causing eutrophication. And this was a NEMO project. I forget what NEMO stands for, but it's part of the University of Connecticut clean water thing. They did testing on this, so they know where the pollutants came from. So it came from that new subdevelopment over there. So nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus are natural substances, but too much of them can lead to health problems in drinking water, and it can stimulate excessive aquatic plant growth, which deplete oxygen levels. So what happens is you get this green mat on top, and that shades out the water. So all of the native plants that are growing in the water lose their sunlight, and they start to die. And when they die, they lay flat on the ground, and they start to give off carbon dioxide, and they deplete oxygen as they rot. Then the fish in there, or any kind of other life, start to die. They go to the bottom. They start to decompose. They take up oxygen to decompose and give off CO2, which is a greenhouse gas. And then the algae itself, after a while, especially the bottom layer that you can't see right now, starts to turn brown, and it falls to the bottom of the pond, and it causes this thing called eutrophication, where there's no oxygen in there. And what limits algae from growing in fresh water is phosphorus. If you add just a little bit of phosphorus to fresh water, you get tons of algae. In salt water, the limiting factor is nitrogen. So if you add nitrogen to salt water, you'll get algae blooms too. And that's what's happening a lot out in the Sound and such. The other one is pathogens. So lots of shellfish places closed, disease-causing bacteria and viruses and other things now other than viruses. So with the presence of fecal matter, presence in water bodies can lead to shellfish closings and, bad health issues. So failing septic systems is where a lot of this can come from, animal waste, and boats dumping their poop out in the water and not going to treatment facilities. Another one is sediment. This is a pollutant. So sediment is eroded silt a lot of times, and if you see water that's turbid like this, generally almost all the time you'll find that there's some sedimentation going on. So if this was a little stream in here and it had a stone-lined bottom, often all kinds of aquatic insects would live in those little crevices in the stones, and they would in turn feed little miniature native brook trout or minnows or something else. But when you introduce so much sediment into water like this, all the pore spaces between those rocks get filled up with sediment, and it chokes out and kills the aquatic insects that are in there. And then the whole, it's like a domino theory. Once you start taking out one of the life forms that's native to that little stream, then it just ripples right up. So the trout leave or die. The water becomes shallower because the sediment fills it up. Shallower water heats up much quicker and causes a warm season change, so you might have crayfish in there where trout used to be. So big difference just with sediment. So fish spawning, all different types of pollutants, and this comes a lot from road sand, which is why they stopped using sand, but now they've got major problems with salt. Big problems with salt. Sodium is a really big issue, especially if you're a lover of sugar maples. Say goodbye to them if they continue to apply salt as they're doing right now.
The synthetic stuff they're offering now that,
The magic salt?
yeah, whatever.
I don't know it as synthetic. The one magic salt I know has beet sugar in it. Beet sugar and salt. Do you know of another one? The liquid, right, that they're spraying down?
No, it's granular. It's granular.
Oh,
yeah.
you're probably thinking of calcium chloride?
Maybe.
Yep. Yeah, that's not any better. It's just,
Yeah.
it's, chloride is chlorine, very close.
Yep.
If there's any chemists in here, they'd probably slap me for that, but, there are not too many molecules off.
Okay.
And that's a sterilant. Chlorine is a sterilant. So agricultural fields, construction sites, any disturbed areas are backyards. Very often, we try to grow grass under shade trees, and it comes up nice in the springtime, looks halfway decent even in the fall. But the summer rains, when the ground is not covered with lawn, it can take sediment. The best of the sediment too, the topsoil, the really good stuff, and run it right down into wetlands and things and cause real problems. So another pollutant of concern is toxic chemicals. So heavy metals, pesticides, all kinds of barrels. We all heard about brownfields and such. So they're often very resistant to breakdown, and they're usually very toxic to us and to other mammals, dogs for one thing. So some sources are, of course, industrial, commercial, household, our own households, and agricultural chemicals and auto emissions. Not so much anymore. Lead is out of the fuel that we use, but there's still other pollutants in the fuel, as we all know. And then floatable debris. So we've all seen this. So plastics and other things that don't break down over long, long periods of time. Really an aesthetic problem also, but lots of wildlife will try to use that for nesting material. We've all heard about six-pack holders that, you know, the birds get around their necks. That is not an exaggeration. That happens all the time. Fishing line, stuff like that. So illegal dumping is one of the big ones. Street litter, anywhere on the end of a dead end you find all kinds of stuff being dumped. Beach litter, and again, boats. And then thermal stress, one that you might not have thought of. So this is Trout Brook. And I can tell you that going through this little area here that they channelized, this is Army Corps of Engineers thinking, by the way. This is I-84, and they wanted to take a lot of water from I-84 and dump it into this river, but they knew that they would cause a lot of erosion. So they cut all the trees back on the side. Trout Brook was completely shaded. It's not anymore. And then they built these concrete channels, and this water is about 4 inches thick, 4 inches deep. So the water comes through this superheated area, full sun, goes right through that one area, and any fish that are in there are instant bouillabaisse. I mean, there's no warm, cold season fish or aquatic insect can live in there now. So everything downstream from this mistake that they did is bass and other kinds of fish when this was called Trout Brook. And it's all because they thought they were doing the right thing with all this really heavy engineering, when they could have done this much, much more.
Is that West Hartford?
Say again?
Is that West Hartford?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Yep. So, invasive species. Watch this. The only pollutant that multiplies is invasive species. I have some good news. This is a picture of purple loosestrife. We probably all know it. Lithorum saliciferia. I don't know if it's saliciferia. Lithorum something. Anyway, there is a beetle now that's been introduced, and it works great. My company has introduced it in several areas of my clients' properties where we had marshes where it was getting overrun by it. And here's what it does. Over a couple-year period, it perforates and chews the leaves so well that the plants can't make energy out of the leaves. The funny thing is, it leaves about 10% of the purple loosestrife alone. Somehow, it manages to leave enough so that there's always a few beetles, and those beetles are always laying eggs. And then what the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station did was down at Beardsley Park in Bridgeport, they had an area where they were testing this before they let it out to the public kind of thing. And they used the pesticide and they killed all of the beetles that they introduced. And they wanted to see what would happen. The loosestrife came back and it started to run amok again. They introduced the beetle, it ate it down to about 10% and then stayed there. So then they studied it for another 5 years, and then they finally allowed the beetle to be used. The way that I got to use the beetle was I had to rear them. They gave me the eggs, and I had to grow them, and they're very, very difficult to grow, and time-consuming and expensive. So they'll give you the eggs, but you have to hatch them out. I don't know if it's different now, but anyway, the sites that we put them on, it's amazing how they won't destroy all of their food source. They leave just enough to perpetuate their own race. So, but it is one of the major pollutants that we deal with. There's all kinds of invasive species, not just plants. There are also invasive animals, insects, bacteria, fungi. Any highly adaptable form can be invasive in the right environment. So just don't give them any checks and balances and they'll take off. So here's some things to look for. Polluted runoff from residential areas especially. Lawn fertilizers and septic effluent. Malfunctioning septic systems. Construction, road sand, erosion from lawns and gardens. Household products. See, this one here, lots of people don't even realize. Even some of the seventh generation stuff, if you read it, there's toxins in there. Some of them, not all of them, some of them. But you know borax is boron, and boron is highly toxic to plants. Boron is a trace element that's needed in parts per billion in the soil for plant life, for healthy plant life. If you use a lot of borax and it's running into your septic system and leaching out, you're actually putting pollutants out in the environment.
It used to be years ago, people were using Simple Green, and then I've heard since then that it's not a good thing.
Yeah, Simple Green has gotten the OMRI. Anybody know what OMRI is? The Organic Materials Review Institute. Used to have, it used to be OMRI listed. It was never organic, but it was OMRI listed. And now it doesn't have that anymore.
It doesn't.
So I don't know what they did to their formulation. It used to work really good on mold on houses. Simple Green. Yeah, spray it on. So anyway, lots of household products can be real problems. And of course, pesticides, we don't need to talk about that one too much. Litter and illegal dumping. And then here's the thermal, the heated runoff, removal of waterside vegetation. So how many times, I want to see the water more. You know, we were thinking about that over there. That will aid and abet heating up that water, you know. And but right now, I think that water's so slow and it's tidal, I don't think we have to worry about losing trout there. And impoundments, anytime we impound water. So I worked for a client, I'll tell you who it is, Paul Newman. And he lived on the Aspetuck River. And for 6 years he fought the conservation department because he wanted to put some rocks in across the Aspetuck to back it up so we could have a little bit of a ponding area on the Aspetuck River, which is another trout stream. And he elicited the help of Trout Unlimited, who love to put impoundments in. Deeper water creates little spots for them, for the bigger fish to hide and all of that. So long story short, he did get permission to do it, but the water temperature had to be checked throughout the season. And there was a couple of times when the water was really low, we had to open up the channel. The town would come in, check the water temperature in this pond, in this ponding area, and we'd have to open it up and allow free flow. So that does really heat things up when you impound. And then of course we use invasive plants. That's how most of them got here. Most of them were introduced as landscape plants, as ornamentals. So the word is out, especially in Connecticut and Massachusetts. I don't know if you know, but there's a 38 plant list that the Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group has published that you cannot plant, propagate, buy, trade, give away, and there's 38 plants on that list. Most of them are aquatic plants, but things like barberry, things like Euonymus alatus are on that list. A lot of us use them. Burning bush is the common name. So soil erosion. Composition of plant groups can often offer clues to soil disturbance. So we're getting away from all the pollutants, and what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some clues. So if you have a different mindset and you think organically, I like to say that organic is much more than just changing from a bag of synthetic fertilizer to a bag of organic fertilizer. Organic thinking is a lifestyle. It's a way of thinking a little bit deeper. And I'll give you a perfect for instance. This one lady wanted me to apply coyote urine that she saw online, that you can buy coyote urine to keep the deer away. And I said, have you ever thought for a minute where the coyote urine comes from? And she said, from coyotes. I said, do you think they give up their urine voluntarily? I mean, you know, so she said, oh, you know, I didn't think about that. Well, this is, to me, that's organic thinking. Okay, we're not using a pesticide, we're using coyote urine, which is supposedly organic or whatever, or some kind of alternative anyway. But when you think about it, another level under it, it's despicable. They catheterize, they trap them, they catheterize them, they pump them full of liquids, they pee until they die in captivity, is what it is. And they bottle the stuff and sell it to you. Here, this is great stuff. So that's what I'm thinking of. So when we look at a piece of property, here's a neglected front yard. Now most people would call this neglected. I think it's a work of art. And it taught me so much. So let me explain what I learned. I went by this, by the way, at least 100 times in my life, and it just always looked like an unkempt place that bothered me. There was something about this landscape that bothered me, and then I finally realized what it was. It was a teacher, and the teacher arrives when the student is ready. Well, I finally had an aha moment. Up here is a very flat piece of lawn that's pitched very gradually this way, and it's a lawn of neglect. So it's weeds, what people would call weeds. I call it plant diversity. We don't use the W word. And a lot of fescue, which likes to grow with no fertilizer, very little water, all of that. And the roof water sheds off, goes onto the lawn, and then crawls across the lawn until it gets right about here. This slope is much steeper right here than it is right here. So the water comes across the lawn, builds up velocity and volume, and spills over that fairly level into this much steeper area right here. And with it, it's erodible properties. Water is highly erodible. It makes things erode, washes things out. So what happened was it took the topsoil and all the fine organic matter out of that surface soil and deposited a lot of it here, and then even more of it down here in the low spot. So what happened is, you could see these plants that are coming up. This is called panicum. It's a native grass that will only thrive where there's very, very depauperate soil. It does not like a rich mesic soil. It doesn't like water. It won't thrive. And this over here is blue stem, little blue stem. So right in here, there's a whole host of plants that only like a sandy, gravelly, extremely well-drained, low organic matter soil. So we have flat spot up there. We have the steep spot there. We have the moderate spot there. And then we have a flat and even low spot here. And you can look at every single one of these. There's a completely different plant regime growing there. So that's what this landscape was telling me. This landscape of neglect actually showed me that I grow wildflower meadows as part of my landscape job. And trying to grow a wildflower meadow in rich topsoil is a real pain in the neck because the invasives want to come in. It favors certain grasses like the cool season grasses, and you can't really get the good, strong natives to get established. And this is the reason why. Right here is because it likes a depauperate soil. It likes a much thinner, leaner soil. So there are fat soil plants and there are lean soil plants. So how a little thing can become a big problem. So how many of us have leaders that come right down the lawn? You don't have to incriminate yourself here. It was a rhetorical question, but she raised her hand, yes.
Yeah, you.
So anyway, you have a leader coming down that might be handling who knows how many square feet of roof. And then over time, you put the little concrete spillway in, and then it digs a little runnel, and it takes with it some topsoil. There might be some bird poop up on the roof. There might be some pollution deposition on the roof. All that comes running down with that water. Then if you fertilize your lawn, if you apply any pesticides on your lawn, it picks up some of that. Then it goes over down the sidewalk and down the driveway, and it picks up rubber from your tires and brake dust and some oil. And then it collects even more, and it goes down your driveway, and it goes into the curb, and it goes with all of your neighbor's stuff, and gets all collected, and goes into one of those drains, and then can come out into something like this. So highly erodible. So this tiny little thing multiplied by a whole neighborhood full, okay, can cause a lot of runoff that goes into a pipe, and pipes are built to take water, put it into a smaller area, and get it off the area as fast as possible.
So, well, you would have a plant area in front of where the runoff is coming off your roof to contain it, or?
Over here, the rule is you don't want to entrain water any closer than 10 feet to your foundation, because you could have a swimming pool in your basement if you do that. So out here somewhere, you would
Yep.
do some kind of a
Okay.
structure, which I'll get into later. I don't
Okay.
want to get into it right this
Fine.
minute, but very soon. So this is a highly erodible little stream that for centuries carried a little rivulet of water whenever it rained. It was an intermittent stream. Another subdivision upslope from that, all the drainage was taken into this great big basin, and then the overflow for the basin went right into that little stream, and you could see what happened. Now, just think of the tons of phosphorus and nitrogen that was in that topsoil, and all the silt and all the gravel that washed out into the wetland down below. I mean, devastation, really. So all from, might sound, implausible, but you make a mistake like this and multiply it thousands of times, and you get big blowouts like this. So I think this organic thinking, this whole organic thinking, is how do we handle the water as soon as we can get to it, as close to the source of the problem. We'll get to that in a minute. So here's the big problem. That was the small thing. Here's the big one. Look at that. So everything's connected. Water comes down here, blows out here, and eventually ends up in a larger body of water, could be the Sound. So what happened in this instance, Middlesex County, a farmer had tilled a large acreage right along the river just before a major downpour. Didn't check the weather, didn't care, whatever, but he tilled his soil. It was all loose and very erodible, and here comes the storm, and there's his topsoil, and his phosphorus, and his nitrogen, and his pesticides, all right here, and working its way down. So this is a really big problem. It can happen a lot. So I call lawn the spoiled brat plant of the plant kingdom. And I challenge anybody in here, we have some pretty smart plant people here. Does anybody know a higher maintenance plant than lawn? I thought the cutleaf weeping white birch. Which one?
African violets.
African violets. Well, okay. All right. I never grew those, but I hear they're pickled. Yeah. So, anybody ever hear the St. Francis and God having the talk? Little ditty. Well, St. Francis says to God,
What is that stuff?
what? Yeah.
What is that?
What is all that stuff? And God said, well, I put all that diversity down there. Where did it all go? He says, oh, Lord, it's the suburbanites. I said, well, what's going on? He says, oh, they're mowing it. He says, well, what do they mow it for? It goes to flower, it goes dormant, it's a natural process. I had it all figured out. What are they mowing it for? Lord, they not only mow it, but they bag it. And then they throw it away. Oh my God, And then they pay to have it, the leaves cleaned off. Well, at least the trees drop the leaves and replenish. No, Lord, they pay to have the leaves cleaned off, and then they bring them to other places. So the whole thinking about that little ditty is, how ridiculous it is that we can have so much lawn and think that that is okay environmentally. Now that is my opinion, okay? I have planted lots of lawns, and I planted lots of lawns that are too damn big, because that's what the client wanted. And I had to do what I had to do. But this was a client where I told them, I said, you have way too much lawn. So I have to explain this house. You see this house here?
Yeah.
It's the same house.
Oh my God.
And, wait a minute, there's more. There's another wing that goes out the back over here, just like that. It's about 15,000 square feet of house. 2 kids, 2 parents, 2 people to live there. One does the cooking, the other one does the cleaning. And in the back is a courtyard. Between these 2 wings, there's a courtyard. And that's the only place the kids are allowed. Because it's sprayed for deer, for ticks, it's fenced off, it's clean. This out here is dirty and scary. So I talked to the client, and I got them to start thinking about reducing the amount of lawn. So we did some things. First thing we did was we installed something that we're going to talk a lot about, a rain garden. So off the house, the gutters, all this roof was draining off this way and causing this wet area. So we installed a small rain garden. The husband is a golfer, and he wants that perfect bluegrass sward of lawn, and that's his bragging right. His wife, however, knows that the kids are going to play on the lawn. He's going to try and get the kids to play on the lawn anyway. And they have pets, and the wife knows, and the husband knew too, but really didn't care. Kind of weird. Anyway, long story short, this is now we planted meadows, and we planted the forest back, where the forest was cut back, and it was so easy to do. I went into the woods edge along that surrounds this property, and I did an inventory of all of the native plants there, from the ferns all the way up to the overstory trees. Then I got a bunch of those same exact plants, and I started to plant fingers of them coming out of the woods into the lawn, and just let them spread. And now, so this is about 10, 12 years ago, now the lawn is probably about 2 acres of lawn, where it was probably 4 before. And the rain gardens and the beds, we built islands of native perennials in the lawn. So one here, then a year later, another one over here. And now they're starting to coalesce. And the husband can take it little by slowly. This is the thing I had to learn. You can't go and browbeat them and beat them up and say, you know, you're doing terrible things to your kids and you're killing your dogs and all of that. But if you do something that's pretty, that gradually changes their thinking, you can get someplace. So this has been a real plus for us. Question?
What about like wildflowers?
Well, that's what meadows are.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all wildflowers and native
They
grasses.
don't require special soil or any of that.
That was the big problem here. There was, you know, probably 4 inches of pretty good topsoil. So it was actually an area where we really wanted to plant a real wildflower meadow. We brought in a lot of junk fill.
Wow.
We mixed that in with the topsoil and then planted our seed right in that. And it does much better. It's funny. Some plants love it and some don't. So this might not look like a whole lot of lawn, but when you come over here, and this was back in 2008, we've been toiling on this since, believe me. So 63,250 square miles of the continental US is lawns. And if you look at where the money is, you look where the green is. Okay? Over there, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York City, up here in Long Island Sound, all the way along Florida. So, like I said, as far as the nation goes, it doesn't look like a lot of lawn. But when you think about, you know, 63,000 square miles of lawn, and that's back in 2008. We've been laboring on that since. So, irrigation. One of my favorite Jerry Garcia quotes, "Too much of everything is just enough." And these people definitely were Jerry Garcia fans. So, you know, the one thing about irrigation, the only reason why I put this in, it doesn't have anything to do with toxics, it doesn't have anything to do with the sound. Water is our next war, I think. Everybody pretty much knows that. So, lawn is a pig on water. There are certain lawns that you can grow that use much, much less water. And we'll get into that in a little while. But if you water effectively, if you use infrequent but deep waterings, the cartoon shows you have a much stronger plant on top and a much more deep and extensive root system. When you do shallow watering, you get a really shabby looking root system and a shabby looking plant. And if you think of the grass blades as the solar panels of that plant, and it's the only way it can make energy from the sun is through the leaves, a healthier leaf system does a much better job of capturing photosynthesis than this plant will. And that's why the root system is so much deeper. Plus, if you syringe water, so many people have irrigation systems and they run them 4 times a week, 15 minutes a zone. Well, that puts about 1/4 of an inch of water down 4 times a week. So it just wets the surface. Where are the roots going to go? They're going to go where they can get a drink. They're not going to grow down because it's bone dry down there.
I've had arguments with lawn care professionals
Yes,
who insist that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
And it's like, it can't be. It makes no sense. But they will run it every day for like
Yep.
10 minutes, twice
Yep.
a day.
Yep. The only time I do espouse that is when you're growing seed. When you first seed a
Right.
lawn, it needs frequent light watering so you don't cause erosion. Also, golf courses syringe water to cool the grass because heat stress is bad for grass.
Well,
Oh my God. You know?
But golf courses, no, too short.
Yes, way too short. So the other thing I was going to get to here is an organic lawn to me is 3 inches or higher in height. And 3 inches is the magic number that UConn, Dr. Bill Dest, who was definitely a chemical guy, who towards the end of his tenure at UConn started to convert towards organic. And one of the big things that he conceded is that a 3-inch lawn that was thick and vigorous did not need any crabgrass control because it cast enough shade on the soil where crabgrass seed could not germinate.
Oh, Scott's not gonna support him.
Well, of course not. And that's why when you buy mowers, they mow best at 2 inches. So 2 to 2.5 inches is where the mower vacuum works the best. So raising the mower to 3 inches or even more, during the summer we'd like to mow at 4 inches. If the kids are kicking a soccer ball, we'll put it down to 2 3/4, the lowest. But that's in the summer, after the crabgrass season has already germinated. So just the perfect, the best weed control for lawn I've ever found is a good bag of grass seed and mowing at 3 inches. No weed killer needed.
Do golf places, do they still use a lot of pesticides? Because
Golf courses?
Yeah, golf,
Oh, yeah.
because a lot of people talk about, oh, we're gonna retire in a golf community, and I'm like, yeah, and you're gonna breathe in all those pesticides.
After a year there, turn off the lights, they're glowing in the dark.
Yeah.
I mean, I know.
You can't
exactly.
say that to people. but-
I do, I
Yeah, you
absolutely
can,
do,
but-
yeah. I know the truth about the pesticides, I've been on both sides of it. I applied a lot of them and now I know the truth, and I tell people. The thing about golf courses, they're not legislated like we are. There's a weed control called Confront that has been taken off the market, but the golf courses can still use it.
Oh my God.
So anyway, pesticides in urban and suburban landscapes, 50% of all lawns are regularly treated with pesticides, and even higher in upscale areas. Sometimes every single place gets done because you don't want to be seen as a pariah. God forbid a dandelion sprouts in your lawn, and the next door neighbor's got and I'm not kidding, this is true.
Good grass.
I've landscaped all through White Plains, Greenwich, Darien, New Canaan, down in New York City, and this is the way they think. It's changing though, it's really cool. A lot of my customers are organic people now that live in those areas. U.S. Geological Survey says that insecticides were highest in streams from urban areas, go figure, and were frequently present in concentrations too high for things to live in those streams. Herbicides used to control weeds in golf courses and rights-of-way frequently contaminate urban streams and shallow groundwater. So wetlands get totally impacted by the use of what's called cosmetic pesticides. And we all know that Canada led the fight. I don't know if you guys know that. Canada led the fight to outlaw what they call cosmetic pesticide use. And now there's whole municipalities and a lot of the states up in Canada, you're not allowed to put down crabgrass control. You're not allowed to put down broadleaf weed control, which happens to have 2,4-D in it, which happens to be the #1 breast cancer
Which one?
substance, 2,4-D.
And it's
2,
in what?
4, D.
And what's it come from?
It comes from broadleaf weed control.
Wow.
So things that kill chickweed, things that kill dandelions, things that kill purslane, ground ivy, a lot of the weed plant diversity that I love to see in a lawn,
Yeah.
that 2,4-D mixed with other chemicals. They often sell something called Trimec, which is 2,4-D, MCPP, and dicamba, which is a soup of herbicides that together have never been tested. So the synergy of what those three chemicals do, nobody really knows. But you'll have that weed-free lawn if you apply that. But that goes into groundwater, that goes into people, little kids, their skin is so absorbent, they're constantly putting their hands in their mouths, and breast cancer, both male and female. #1 cause in the world, 2,4-D. And it's the #1 most heavily used herbicide, by the way. Even more than Roundup. Who said that? Synthetic fertilizer. So there's a direct correlation between synthetic fertilizer and childhood leukemia. So not even a pesticide, a fertilizer that's made from synthetic urea. There's doctors, one doctor in Trumbull, Connecticut, as a matter of fact, is one of the foremost doing the study. I can't put that up on the board because it's not final yet, they haven't published it and all of that, but they have a direct correlation between childhood leukemia and fertilizer. So 70 to 85% of the homeowners fertilize or have them fertilized. Only 20% of them get a soil test. And I think half of those lied, really, when they're asked. Because the thing about organic is you only want to put what's necessary on your lawn. Anything excess, even if it's organic, becomes a pollutant. So if you have lots of nitrogen and phosphorus in your soil, and you put a heavy nitrogen and phosphorus organic fertilizer down, and it can't be utilized by the plants because there's already plenty there for plant growth, it runs off, or it absorbs down into the ground and goes into the groundwater and causes nitrate pollution to drinking water. Homeowners put down, this is incredible, put down an average of 107 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. Commercial lawn services put down over 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. The Ecological Society of America says that human additions to global nitrogen load have tremendous effects on soil biodiversity, aquatic systems, and air quality. So using too much nitrogen doesn't only cause pollution of the groundwater and the wetlands, it causes all kinds of problems. So synthetic fertilizer is the major source of human nitrogen load. Almost all soils in Connecticut have adequate to excessive amounts of phosphorus already in the soil, so don't add more. I actually brought something. I was trying to get copies of this, but it's so hot right now that you can't even get a copy. But this is I'm going to pass this around. That's a handout from the Northeast Organic Farming Association that tells you what you have to do before applying a fertilizer. It's a state law. NOFA, the group that I strongly work with and belong to, helped to pass a law in the state of Connecticut and Massachusetts that in order to apply phosphorus near a body of water, fresh water, you have to have a soil test first, and the soil test has to prove that you need it. And the same thing for nitrogen in salt water. And if you live in brackish water, you have to do both. So many people are not doing soil tests. It's just amazing. And they're putting down fertilizer thinking they're doing the right thing, and they're causing a lot of pollution. So,
Is this
yes.
online?
Say again?
Is this online?
Yes, it is. Yep. So homeowners put down all that stuff, and Ecological Society of America says that the nitrogen load, almost all soils have enough phosphorus, and most of them have enough nitrogen. So you don't really need to put any. So the best way, back in college, we had this really cool college professor who was really in love with soil. And he had great ways of explaining things. And he said that if you have nutrients in the soil that are in a form that are not available to plants, in other words, they can't be absorbed by the plant roots, it's like having your favorite cookies in the whole wide world, warm and inside a glass jar with the jar top so tight that you can't open it. You can see through the glass and you can see the cookies. They're right there, but they're not available to you. And he said all you have to do is adjust the soil pH, the acidity or alkalinity, loosens the top, you can get right in there and get the cookies. So lots of soil in Connecticut has phosphorus, but the pH might be too low or too high. The sweet spot for lawn is about 6.8 on the pH scale. If you can get near 6.8, you release all the phosphorus your lawn can use. You won't have to put any down, 9 times out of 10, or 8 times out of 10 anyway. So that's the handout I just passed around. It's learn how to quantify nutrients. It'll tell you just how to figure out what you have in your soil before you apply.
Mike,
Yes?
what's the impact of biological activity in the soil on availability? I mean, they're living off of that soil.
Biological activity releases the nutrients in the soil. So by changing the pH, you're changing the chemistry of the soil. You're locking up hydrogen. So when you raise pH by adding lime to a lawn, you're actually sequestering hydrogen, which then is less toxic to the soil food web or all the organisms in the soil. And then that can start to chug along, and they break up all of the little phosphorus that if you take a handful of soil and really get it right down to the fine grit, and then if you look at that under a 10x hand lens, you'll see incredible amounts of little aggregates and little quartz-like things, and put that under a 100-power microscope, and you'll see a lot more. And then go deeper and deeper, just like the organic thinking, just go deeper and deeper. You're going to find a lot of phosphorus in those little rock particles. And it's not available to the plant, but the organisms in the soil food web, the fungi, the protozoa, the nematodes, they break that down. They poop it out, and it becomes plant-available fertilizer. It's affectionately known in the organic land care industry as the poop loop. So everything happens in a circle. Compost, same thing. No waste in nature, it's a human term. Waste is a human term. No waste in nature. Everything is used up and used again and used again. So here's Long Island Sound. This is New York and West, and this is where about you guys are. And this is getting kind of old because this shows that this side is still in pretty good shape. From what I hear, there's been a lot of testing done in the sound up this way, and you're starting to get things that look a lot more like down here. So here's the rotting dead algae I spoke to you about, and here's the hypoxic conditions that are created from lack of oxygen. So these areas are literally dead off of New York City. There's no fish, there's no clams, no nothing living in that water. And then if you come up towards where we are now, it gets cleaner. However, that's changing. So every single time we apply a fertilizer or a pesticide, what goes on the ground goes in the sound. And it's just starting to build up to a point where we can't really tolerate that anymore. And it's going to be people like us that are going to change it. So here's a funny little thing. When your pet goes on the lawn, remember it just doesn't go on the lawn. So you might as well take your dog right down to the sound, let it poop right in the ocean. All right? And the same thing with fertilizer. Okay? You might as well just go out to the sound and just spread fertilizer right there, because anything. Now, don't get me wrong. Dogs poop on lawns all the time and don't cause problems. But if you have a lawn that has a slope, or if you have a neighborhood full of dogs and you get a large rain event with a lot of fresh poop on the lawn, and that ends up going down the storm sewer, you are going to aid and abet this problem. And everybody, a lot of people fertilize lawns, and they do it responsibly. So this is, a graphic depiction of what you don't want to do, but there's lots of room in between to make sure. So here's some case studies. I'm winding down the presentation. I want to just show you some projects that we've done. So this is a project in New Canaan. The New York Times called it the greenest house in Connecticut. It was not only the greenest house, it was the greenest landscape. They got a platinum LEED certification for this, the highest green building certification there is. And all the rainwater had to be captured. Every 1,000 square feet of roof, or any 1,000 square feet of impervious surface, whether it be a driveway or a roof, when a 1-inch rain event falls on that, that 1,000 square feet of roof or driveway collects 600 gallons of water. 600 gallons for an inch for every 1,000 square feet. So those of us that are using 50 and 80 gallon rain barrels underneath their downspouts, woefully inadequate. Better than nothing, but woefully inadequate. So what we did here is, this looks like a rain barrel, but on the bottom of it is a pipe that goes into two 2,400 gallon cisterns buried in the ground, and all of the irrigation was irrigated by the rainwater. And we had solar pumps that ran on 4-watt pumps, little square solar panels that were inconspicuously hidden in the landscape, that had etiolation machines. They would follow the sun like the sun plant does, and collect the sun's energy, store in a small little battery, and run these 4-watt pumps. And all of the irrigation had drip irrigation system, very low pressure. You didn't need a lot of power to run that. All of the materials on the property were either reclaimed or with this certain designation that they call ecologically harvested. I don't really know what that means, but it has to be stamped that way. So the shipping, everything had to be 180 miles or less. All the plants had to be within 50 miles or less. What grows natively within 50 miles of this property. So we put 26,000 plants on this property. It's a good sized property. A lot of the plants were this big. Plug plants. They come in trays of 38, 50, 75, 95. But we planted lots and lots of them. Rain gardens and all kinds of things. So here's a picture of the cisterns underground. There's 4 of them here. It's 2,400 gallons in the front, 2,400 gallons in the back. And we never ran out of water. And when we had too much water, it spilled into a big rain garden we had in the backyard. Here's a problem where we had a major erosion issue, and this is a passive solar house. You see the big overhangs, you see the reflective glass. So in the wintertime, when the sun angle can go into the house, it warms the house. During the summertime, when the sun angle is much higher, the overhangs keep the sun from going in the house and keeps it cool. But we had this really big problem here. We had it's really steep, and the rain would come down the house. They didn't believe in gutters, no gutters here, and it would just blow out the soil all the time. So sometimes organic thinking is just using what you have on site. So we dug out the soil, and we got some bentonite clay, which is just your average everyday clay you can dig out from certain areas. This place happened to have clay pretty close by, and we placed clay on the ground, and then a hole in the center of that went into a cistern. So we had a hole with a pipe that went into a cistern, and then we placed lots and lots of native stone that was from that site that was screened out of the topsoil. So the water runs off the house, down the side of the house, into this area, which is really a catchment. It goes into that pipe and goes into the cistern, and there's a pump about a foot off the bottom of the cistern, because this does drag some sediment with it, and the cistern needs to be cleaned out. And then again, with the 24 volt, 4 watt solar pumps, we're able to irrigate the landscape there. So sometimes you don't need plants at all to do things like this. And then this is a landscape in Middlebury, Connecticut, where this landscape won an award from the state of Connecticut, and the first selectman was really against this in town. So Middlebury is up high, has lots of areas that shed, and this is the bottom of about a half-a-mile hill. So lots and lots of water came from one lawn to the next lawn to the next lawn. A lot of water sheeted down the road and ended up in my client's property, which was at the bottom of this hill. Well, when she wanted to build a house on this land, the town engineer told her she would have to put in 6 3-foot diameter manholes, storm drains, 3-foot round storm drains, 6 of them in the landscape, an 18-inch pipe connected to the storm sewer system, which then went to one of those little streams that we saw that got totally blown out. And she heard me do a talk somewhere, I forget, and I forgot to tell you what she does for a living. She was an international flower judge. She flew all over the world judging flowers, and perfection was just good enough for her. And when she saw my presentation on anything but perfection, I do a lot of this kind of stuff, a lot of and this. So there's lots and lots of thought that goes into it, but the precision gardening, she was sick of it. She wanted some raised beds where she could do her fancy schmancy, I call her Gucci plants, could be in the raised beds, and the rest of it she wanted relaxed. So that is a stone pathway. There's a little stone edging, and then right over here are her raised beds. So 3.5 feet high, so she didn't have to bend over. They were only 4 feet wide, so she could work them from the end. But this is a 300-foot rain garden that opens up to 25-foot wide ponds in 3 areas and goes right around the back of the property, takes all of that water from that half-mile hill. And the first selectman, we had a major rainstorm where Waterbury actually had bridges flood out, which is downhill from Middlebury. The first selectman drove from his office and went to what we call the oh shit pipe. I got so much water, oh shit, what am I going to do with it? So you have the outflow pipe. He ran over to the outflow pipe and looked down in the storm sewer, and no water was coming out. The rain garden handled it all.
Wow.
But this was an extensive rain garden. We dug down 3.5 feet, 25 feet wide in some areas, filled it full of 50% sand, 25% topsoil, and 25% compost, and then planted in that heavily. So you can see, you can't shoot an arrow through that garden pretty much. But it's all native plants, and it sucks up water like crazy, and it has all kinds of diversity. Insects love it. So we had a compacted wet area on one of our clients' property. It was a big estate that was subdivided. This was the last piece of land to be built on. So all the other builders shed all their water into this open lot. My client inherited everybody else's water. So it sat in this one spot, and you could see how hard and compacted the soil is. So there's the subsoil right there, probably about 12 or 14 inches down. Being a low spot, a lot of the topsoil had washed into that area, so the topsoil was much deeper than it would normally have been. So what we did was, this is called hard engineering. This is not the soft stuff I was talking about, but sometimes this is necessary. So there's the engineer, and there's the foreman. That's my Ellie, who's now in heaven waiting for me. I'm in no hurry, but yeah. So these are called infiltrators, and they're in gravel beds, and the slope comes down this way with everybody's water, comes into this area right here, hits these infiltrators, goes down over to here, and then into this major rain garden. So you can see this big berm. That's a soil berm made mostly of clay and topsoil mixed together. The reason why we had to do that was because this was so impervious, because it being a wet spot, it didn't absorb, it didn't percolate well. So what we had to do is we had to put good percolation soil on top of it, but we didn't want to lose it. So we raised the lip all the way around it, and we filled this full of the mix I just told you about, and then planted it chock full. And what happened was, there's neighbors right behind here, houses and everything, they were getting blown out with the runoff. As the big storms were coming, this pond would fill up before the rain garden, and then would spill over into their property, big erosion issues. And my client was the pariah, when it really wasn't his fault at all. So after about 2 years being in the house, we came up with the idea to do this. That's one of the outfalls. So there's the infiltrators now covered. There's the supervisor keeping track of everything. And so that's the infiltrators covered with fabric, and then a 6-inch pipe going into a bunch of surge stone, just in case we had too much. We wanted to make sure that this was all going to be buried. Here's my sand, topsoil, and compost mix. That's going to fill this whole area. And then that's the material going in. We had it mixed where we bought the materials. We had it all mixed and dumped in. And there's that gravel. Oh, I should back up a couple and show you a couple more things. This gravel strip right here has a pipe in it. And you can see the riser right here. So there's the pipe going in. It's a 6-inch perforated pipe. And then there's a bleed off that goes all the way down to the street storm sewer. So you always have to make sure that if this gets overwhelmed, you have a way to handle the excess. So we didn't want to flood the neighbors again. So there's a 13-inch diameter pipe here that has a riser, so we can clean up this pipe when we need to. So this is a 6-inch perforated pipe with 3/4-inch gravel wrapped around it, and then pea stone over the top. You do not use filter fabric in a rain garden. You do not use filter fabric. It gets clogged with all the fines from that really good topsoil that you're putting in there. And it forms an impervious layer right over the drain, and it just screws it all up. So this is filter fabric, but it's on top of the infiltrators. You would not put that over a pipe that you've installed in the ground. And then this is the planting going in. First thing we do is we put in the larger woody plants. All these get placed depending on their hydrologic conditions. So in other words, the plants in the middle, where the rain garden is the lowest, are the plants that like it the wettest. And then as you go out to the edges, these are the plants that don't like it as wet. So there's all different hydro conditions in a rain garden. You get the wettest in the middle and the driest along the edges. So we placed all the woody plants, and we plant all of those, and then we mulched this with a special hardwood shredded mulch. The reason why we want hardwood is because it's the #1 first thing that has the ability to bind pollutants, especially nitrogen and phosphorus, to the shredded mulch. And then rain percolates that phosphorus and nitrogen out of the mulch into the soil, and then these plant roots are designed. These plants are designed for two reasons. Periodic inundation, so they could be flooded or bone dry and still survive, and they suck up nutrients and pollutants. So those are the 2 reasons you'd pick rain garden plants. So there are a whole host of plants that love to do that. So we mulch it. Whoops, I think I hit the twice.
P.
Nope, you mulch it, and then you plant the plug plants in there, the little perennials, the flowering things. Because the last thing in the world you want to do is have a bunch of plants this big and that big around and have to mulch around them. It is a nightmare. So what we did was we planted all of these, and we mulched all of this, then we planted the plugs in it, and then 1 year later,
Wow,
that's what it turned into.
that's in a
So
year.
that's that wet area. There's the grate right there. So that's the overflow. And it's really beautiful, and it attracts a lot of beneficials. Really nice thing to look at. The lip is completely disguised. You can't see it anymore. There's the neighbor back there who doesn't get flooded anymore. And it works really well. And that's a close-up of it. Anybody know fairy candles, Veronica Castro? cardinal flower. There's great blue lobelia here, Lobelia syphilitica, which has a funny story. It was supposed to be a cure for syphilis and it didn't work. And Joe Pyeweed and the seed heads of Lunarda, all growing. Do you see? You can't get an air off through there. That's my whole way of thinking. This is the way nature landscapes. I don't want mulch in between. I want it sock full of plants. Yes.
So maybe that answers my question, which is there much maintenance involved in this, or is it?
Perfect answer. Perfect question.
It sounds like it, isn't it?
What happens when you plant thickly like this, what you don't see is there's lots of grasses in here that are yet to come up. So there's succession. Certain things bloom and fill in. For the first year to year and a half, you have to know a weed from a plant. And the best way is to scratch the soil right at the base of the plant that you think is a weed. And if you don't see the vermiculite, the little white particles that they put in potting soil, chances are it's a weed. Okay? Give it a tug. Give it a tug, and if it feels really strong, maybe it's not a weed, you know? So the first year to year and a half, you do have to selectively weed. In large gardens, we use something called the glove of death method. It's a long rubber glove that's chemical resistant, and then a short cotton glove. And you dip that into a vinegar solution, and you wipe the plants that you don't want in there. Or if you have too many of one kind, like some clients don't like too much red. Oh, there's too much red. And so you go through and you selectively thin it. And then in the springtime, early in the spring, you cut all of that biomass down, and you remove it and compost it out of the rain garden. You want to leave the rain garden soil fairly lean, because does anybody know what cation exchange capacity is? The cation exchange capacity is simply the ability of a soil to absorb and give off nutrients. So the more loaded the soil becomes with nutrients, the less new nutrients it can attract and hold on to. So things happen to leach through that soil much quicker before the plants can get to take it up, or before the soil can clean them, before it goes into the groundwater. So you want to make sure you keep the biomass out of there, which will add all kinds of organic matter and enrichen that soil and not a lot of nutrients. So you want to keep it lean as possible. So that's the other maintenance issue, is weeding for the first year to year and a half. But if you plant this thick, this is 1 year old. We plant them 4 or 5 inches apart and just let them pick fair fights. We know which ones are, you know, there's blueberries in here, there's service berries, there's all kinds of woody plants too. And they all pick a fight, and it gets really, really thick. And it's very low maintenance after a year and a half. So here's my farm. This is the dirt road we live on, and there's a slope going down this way, and there's a lot of erosion, as you can see. And the big problem is, there's my swimming pond over here. That's totally sedimented from the road. So there's runoff going into the road directly from rain events. And this is the path where it goes right down. My driveway is right here. The water goes down right in through there. I put a bunch of boulders to try and stop it. No good. So we had the road pitched. So there's a low wet spot on this side, and it was dominated by invasives. Most of this is invasives. You do see the goldenrod in here, which was Canada goldenrod, by the way, which I don't know how much I should get into here, but Canada goldenrod is very bossy. It likes to be the only goldenrod, sometimes the only plant. And it does that by giving off a chemical out of its root systems that allow its own kind from growing near it, but it discourages other plants. And the term is called allelopathy. So some of the goldenrods are strongly allelopathic, other plants are too. So this is what we had. There's our rickety barn over there, and the road was pitched this way. So the runoff, as you can see, would go this way. So we had the town work with us. They repitched the gravel road very nicely for us this way. So what we did was we worked on this area, and we built a bio-infiltration area. So we took out any of the good plants we wanted to save, first of all, rescued all of those, and there was many wheelbarrows, not just one, but many wheelbarrows of good plants. And then with my backhoe, I scoured a low spot, building like a rain garden kind of thing. The water comes down off the mountain here, and it comes down off the road here. So we did that, and then right over here is a little bit of a weir, which I'm always mentioning this word because a little intentional high spot makes this pond. And when this ponds, it gives enough time for the sediment to settle out of the water before it runs into the next section of biofiltration area. So I'll show you what this looks like. So then we took we planted it with the rescued plants, and then we mulched it with spent Carex stricta straw, which is a native wetland sedge that you find everywhere in wetlands. We took the straw from that had plenty of seeds in it, and we scattered that down as mulch, and a lot of those seeds came up and grew new Carex stricta plants. And that's what it looked like in the winter. So here's my forebay. Here's where the water comes in from the road that's now repitched this way. So you see the rock, this is all native rock here. Then it comes into the ponding area. Then there's my weir right over there. So this happens to pond and allows the sediment to settle out. So now I just clean this part instead of the whole thing. And then when the water gets high enough, it goes over the weir and goes into the secondary area. And then an ingenious thing that the farmers built 200 years ago was a stone culvert. It goes directly under the road, over into here, and into my pond. So now I'm putting perfectly clean treated water into my pond, rather than all that sediment. And it doesn't have to look ugly. That's what it looks like. There's my rickety barn. There's the lobelia. There's the cardinal flower. Lots and lots of Carex stricta growing in there. And very low impact. And this is not a lot of engineering. There's no concrete. There's no steel. I used a small backhoe. Minimal disturbance to the site. And the town loved it. They gave us a permit right off the bat to do a couple more. So soft restoration along water. I figured salt water is something that you're very interested in. So here's a non-structural method using core fiber logs. Core fiber is spun coconut shells. They take coconut shells and they spin it into like a wool. And then they shove that into jute mesh tubes. Jute is also a natural product. And these tubes are then stacked and then staked in place, and you can grow directly in them. And what happens over time, 4 to 6 or 8 years above ground, is these will rot and deteriorate and no longer are necessary because all of the root systems are now holding the slope. So you take the toe of the slope down here, like this is the beginning of it right over here. There's the Long Island Sound, and we planted a row of high tide plant. I forget the Latin name, but a plant that's salt tolerant, very salt tolerant, has extremely tenacious roots there. And then from up there, we did the core fiber logs in rows, and then planted Spartina. The one Spartina that loves a lot more salt went in the first 2 rows, and the Spartina that likes less salt on the upper rows. And ended up with that after a couple of years. So the other way to do this would be concrete, drainage systems like preformed concrete structures, lots and lots of boulder riprap, which means lots more disturbance, big equipment, big money. There's no need for it. You can soft engineer a lot of these problems away. So even small patios. So this is Long Island Sound, and this is a garden that we did, not my style, but it was definitely their style. They wanted a little seating area, they could have a glass of wine at night and stuff like that, but this is impervious. I did not want to take water from this and sheet it out into there. Although you can see it's a very organic lawn. This is micro clover, almost 100% is what I seeded there. So almost no grass at all. Micro clover grows about 1.5 inches high, has a tiny little white flower, doesn't attract as many bees, people like that, and it is a nitrogen fixer, so you never have to fertilize the lawn. It makes its own nitrogen. So you can buy it, it's very expensive, it's like $40 a pound now. As more people use it, hopefully it'll go down. And then what we did was we used something called rice gravel, which is coarse sand that's been washed. The sand is used to make masonry, and the little tiny gravel pieces that are about twice the size of a grain of rice is separated out and sold as rice gravel. So you see the rice gravel right in between the stone. This is 100% pervious. So if you took a 5-gallon bucket of water and dumped it on that stone, it would go right through. So it goes right through and it percolates into the ground underneath this and gets filtered a little bit before it goes into the water. So even small patios, it doesn't matter. Any impervious surface can be made pervious with a little bit of thinking. So normally people would use stone dust, and they lay stone on stone dust. And what stone dust is trapped rock that's pulverized into a dust. And why it's so good is because when you pack it, it's impervious. It doesn't move. The water will run right off it like a sheet of glass. This stuff will hold your stone nice and firm, but it will never become impervious. That's a weak wall. Sorry, I'm not so good with PowerPoint. So this is the same project. The wall was rebuilt after a big storm, and instead of building it up straight, like it was before, it was straight up and all concrete in there and no drainage. The waves kept coming over the top of it, washing the soil from the back of it, and it took the whole wall and just it fell right over. So what we did was we rebuilt it from the ground up on a 45-degree angle with lots and lots of gravel in between, no mortar. So now any rain that falls on this gets filtered through here and bleeds out. Any storm surge comes up here and goes right back out. Plus we planted this really, really thickly with plants that like to have nice deep. These are Medillind roses, the shrub roses from France. They're on their own root systems. They don't need to be sprayed. They don't need to be fertilized. Meidilland. Medillind roses. Very low maintenance. They're the kind that you see if you've ever been. I have not yet, but I understand in France they grow wild in the mountainsides in very rocky soil. Very, very tough. Stormwater management. Big thing these days is this porous asphalt. So University of New Hampshire, if you want to learn a lot about that, they're the main source of information for porous paving. So you can pour water right through it now. Also, there's porous pavers. Somebody was talking to me today about a pretty good sized project that was done with porous pavers. And then we like to harvest the rain rather than just let it percolate right in, use some of it or let it percolate underground with a dry well. But see, here's the perfect example of, this would be hard engineering. So a big concrete structure needs a big machine, got to dig a big hole. All you have to do is dig a hole, find the rubble from the site, put a bunch of rubble in there, put a layer of filter fabric over the top, and grow your grass right on top. You don't need the big structure. Engineers like to use that stuff. So here's one of the rainwater things on the job in Middlebury. So here's that rain garden coming right around the corner. You can see the drop off here. This is all planted, and the OSHIT pipe is right about here. It goes into the town sewer system, which never worked. This is a 1,200-gallon tank. We have 4 of these on the site. The reason why we chose the 1,200-gallon, they're about that high, and they're so strong you could drive a loaded dump truck over it. This was the access to the backyard, so I didn't want to put something in that I couldn't drive over. So this one works, comes right up this gutter and fills, and then the solar panels pump the irrigation all out. So that's that thing I gave you before. 1 inch of rain on a 1,000 square foot roof equals 600 gallons of water. So if you want to capture enough water, you have to think big. Or just let it percolate in, use rain gardens and bioswales. So when considering water quality, there's no right way to do the wrong thing, and that's the end. Thanks. All right, any questions?
Well, yeah, we went, I don't know if all of you know this, but we toured a few sites in New London today. Riverside Park, Fulton Park, and Green Harbor. And at both Riverside Park and Green Harbor, they're quite different in some ways, but both of them are sloping and have areas of a lot of erosion and water that's ending up in the river. So what kind of soft engineering kinds of things can be done on those sites?
Well, any one of the things that I talked about, one of the biggest things is you want to let's see, probably be helpful to start off this way. Whenever I look at a site and I'm working with erosion or I'm working with water movement, I try to visualize the site as being solid marble. So take all the plants out, take all the trees out, and look at the land with all its undulations and all its pitches and all its angles, and try to imagine that it's marble, smooth marble. Then stand at the top of that slope and take a tennis ball and just start it rolling, and watch how the tennis ball moves down that marble. And that's the fall line, or where the water is going to move. So then if you can use the existing topography and create either swales, berms, bioswales, rain gardens, whatever, to capture that water as it's going through its natural course, all the better. Sometimes, and most of the time, you have to alter the grade. So if the water is going this way but you want it to go that way, you have to change the grade. So what we did at Riverside, quite a few spots were not only eroding, there was a lot of tree roots that were starting to become visible on the surface, and there was a notable amount of erosion happening. Some of it was because soil was just newly spread on a pretty aggressive slope. But there was erosion because back in the day they designed this drainage system that captured water and ran it into the river as fast as they possibly could get it there. So today's thinking is not to do that. Today's thinking is to allow every raindrop possible to soak into the ground where it falls. So what we decided to do, one of the areas that would be really productive, is where they built these incredible, they weren't rills, what did you call them?
Runnels.
Right. Where the runnels were built, which are stone gutters, if you will, to have diversions so that those runnels could collect water and then disperse them in diversions where we had little mini bioswales or little mini rain gardens. A lot of the vegetation that's at those parks are not invasive, and it's really, really thick. So introducing water into some of those areas, you'd have to do very little to really alter the site to make it a bioswale, because there's all kinds of regeneration of native plants of all kinds, maybe about that high, maybe a little bit higher, really thick matrix. You've got grasses, you've got forbs, you've got woody plants. So just by pitching the water, and most importantly, allowing that water to be introduced into these areas in a sheet. So trying to take water, instead of it being concentrated and causing erosion, and when water gets concentrated and you go over a slope, it picks up velocity, and then velocity causes erosion, and erosion has coarse material in it, so it's carrying with it a sediment load that acts like sandpaper and causes more sedimentation. So the rocks that are tumbling down your stream are loosening more rocks that become tumbling down. So if you can introduce the water in a sheet, a wide, thin layer of water into an area where water can be then absorbed, that's the way a rain garden and a bioswale works best. When they're introduced in a concentrated form, they have to go into something called a level spreader, which is an engineering term for nothing more than taking a pipe that's on an angle like this and turning it into a pipe that's angled like this. It doesn't have much of an angle. So if you take a pipe coming down a hill and then just let the water daylight out of the bottom of it, where that water comes out of that pipe, it's going to blow a big erosion hole. But if you connect another pipe on a T, so you have your pipe coming down, and then your pipe connects in a T, and it goes for a long period of area and has perforations in the pipe, the water will go into that pipe, run down both ends, go out the perforations, and go out in a sheet. So it disperses the energy. You can also do that with rock. At the end of the pipe, you can put lots of what we call surge stone. Larger stone close to the pipe, smaller stone away, and you have a fanning effect. So the rock is concentrated near the pipe, and then it's allowed to fan out. So when the water hits those rocks, it breaks up the energy and disperses that water and lets it seep out the rocks and into your biofiltration area. Another thing we saw at one of the sites was some major runoff coming from a parking lot and the railroad, we think. And it's being introduced into a park where Bob was walking through one time and had to turn back because his feet were sinking so far into the lawn, he was actually doing damage. And there's a picnic area there, so people could not use it at all. And there is a Phragmites patch, which is an invasive plant that loves wet feet, loves wet conditions, loves a little disturbance to get started. And you can see where the runoff is coming in, coincides right where the invasive plants are, and there's a big wet area there. It'd be a perfect spot for biofiltration or a rain garden. You would treat the water there, you would stop the erosion from coming down that slope and going into that picnic area. You'd allow the water to percolate in, and it's probably what, about maybe 300-400 yards before the river, or maybe even more. So
Okay.
you have all that soil to filter all of the pollutants out of there, because the railroad sprays the heck out of the sides of the train tracks with very strong herbicides, and that's going to be in that water. So responsibility says you don't want that stuff running off into places where kids are going to be playing, people might have bare feet. That runoff contains a lot more than just water, rain. So you want to percolate that in the ground and then give it as much time as you can before it gets introduced into the Thames. So that was one thing we thought of. There was also ways of terracing where you can get water to move like this, and every time you change the direction of water, you decrease its energy and you allow it to slow down. And when water is slow, it'll soak in. So like I told you before, if you have a lawn that even has a 5% pitch to it, and if you have a major downpour, 85% of it runs off, 15% absorbs. If you had an area that was almost level, like athletic field, big problem with athletic fields, that's why there's so much drainage in them. The water will sit and then percolate slowly. But it depends on what you have underneath. If it's ledge close to the surface, or clay, or if the soil is compacted from a lot of foot traffic or construction equipment and all of that, it's going to change the drainage properties 100%. So every site really is like a fingerprint. Every site is completely different. So you really have to do a lot of site analysis. And one of the simplest things, I have a 9/16 diameter rebar that's about 4 feet high, and I took a grinder and I sharpened the sharp point on it. And I take a 3-pound hammer and I bang it into the ground every 4 or 5 feet. And I try and find where the ledge is, where the compacted soil is. And then there's another thing that's a soil probe that's shaped like a T and has a hollow tube. And the tube has a section of it cut out. So you push that into the soil, you pull it out, and you can look at the soil profile. You can see where the topsoil is, where the topsoil ends, where the B horizon starts, the C horizon, how porous it might be or how compacted it might be. And you can feel when you're going in if it's something that's going to allow percolation to happen or not. So a lot of those areas on the park were so compacted. Another thing about tree roots that I was trying to stress to the town engineer, and I think he got it, was instead of putting topsoil over the top of tree roots, bad idea, really bad idea. Because the tree roots are up on the surface because they have to be. There's something going on underneath, or the soil is being washed away from the top. So if you put soil on top of woody roots and put it up against the trunk, you're going to slowly do damage to the tree. There's a lot more to it than that, but I'm just going to say that. What really works much better is wood chips. So 2 to 3 to 4 inches of wood chips, but definitely not up against the trunk. And what it does, it disperses weight. So you do not compact. It breaks down. Wood chips are made from trees. When trees drop their leaves, it's the only fertilizer that nature gives a forest. 1 layer of leaves every fall. So what we're doing is we're kind of mimicking that a little bit with the wood chips. You're putting wood chips down on the ground, they come in contact with the soil food web, all of those creatures that we talked about, and they start chewing on the carbon in the wood chips because it's like ice cream to them. They love it. They start turning that into worm castings, they start turning that into compost, that breaks down. Guess what that does? It feeds the tree exactly what the tree wants. So you're not only alleviating compaction by taking the pressure off of your foot traffic, you're remediating the soil, and you're getting it, the compaction broken up. The problem with compaction and tree roots is it's very tough to alleviate compacted soil without doing root damage. You can use an air spade, which is a tool that blows soil out of the way, but if the soil is really compacted, the air spade really will not do a good job. The best thing that does a good job are microbes. Fungi, bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, the whole soil food web. Those guys bring stuff in, they loosen it up, the worms appear, which are called macroinvertebrates, and they will take leaves and wood chip pieces, drag them down in their little tubes, and what they don't eat rots away down there and becomes organic matter. And it breaks up, and all of those tubes that the earthworms create allow oxygen and water down to the soil. So just by putting wood chips down, it's really an amazing thing. Yes.
It happens faster than people think.
Yeah, in a couple of years, wood chips could be soil, yeah.
And the grass has the opposite effect. The grass will take the nitrogen out of the rain, and plus you run the green over the top of it, so that's going to impact the soil on top of the tree roots.
Yep. And one other thing about grass, it's got its root system just above where the tree roots are. So if you're putting down fertilizer or if there's natural fertilizer in the soil, they're the first to get fed. So the trees can kind of start. The first thing that an arborist does around the base of a tree, if the tree is hurting, is alleviate any compaction, any competition. And grass is a really big competitor. So yeah. Anything else? Yes?
Have you used compost tea in your work?
Absolutely. Yeah.
How
Boy, that's advanced.
results
Okay.
for soil structure and water?
The thing about compost tea, my company, the number one nutrient that we apply is compost tea. We don't buy any fertilizer anymore. When you're new on our program, if your lawn has been pesticided and it's really compromised, we will use synthetic, we will use organic fertilizers, but we will not use synthetic. Even though sometimes soil that's completely flatlined cannot absorb organic fertilizers. So, simply put, organic fertilizers like broken down feathers and other parts and rock particles, all applied, and then the soil food web breaks those down and then makes those available. But if the soil food web has been killed off by too many pesticide applications or compaction or whatever, you can put down the organic fertilizer and then an application or two or four applications of compost tea right over the top of that. And that aids and abets the organisms that are there and causes them to grow exponentially, and then the fertilizer can work. Now I'll explain what compost tea is. Compost tea is an extract that's made from compost that's been highly aerobic. So you pump lots and lots of air into it as it's being brewed. If you don't pump the air, you're going to have a anaerobic compost tea, which actually creates lots of toxins for plant roots. So you can actually use a bad compost tea, which we've done, as an herbicide. You can make compost tea and let it go bad by not entraining oxygen into it, and spray it on a lawn and kill a lawn and then put plantings right in it. You don't have to use an herbicide, you don't have to dig it out, you could just use bad compost tea. That's how potent the anaerobic microbes can be. So compost tea, say again?
How would you make it bad?
You put good compost tea back down with compost. So you take compost, you put that on the soil, you don't even mix it in, just put it right on top, about 2 inches, and then you apply a drench of compost tea, and you plant directly in that. It comes right back.
Yeah, but how would you make the compost tea bad to put on?
Oh, how do you make
grass?
it bad? What you do is you brew a really rich compost tea, and I'll explain how to do that in a minute. Brew really rich compost tea, and then shut off the air pumps. And go away for about 6 to 12 hours. And come back and have a really putrid smell. And it'll also have a biofilm on the top. And that is anaerobic bacteria. So all the aerobic bacteria that love oxygen are killed or outcompeted. And what you end up with is anaerobic bacteria, which is a lot of ammonia and a lot of other things. Methane is created in that whole process. That's why swamps, when you dig into swamps, you get that methane smell, that sulfury, smells like farts. Well, what that is, that's anaerobic bacteria. the soil is waterlogged, so there's not enough oxygen in that soil. So you take that and you spray that, and that's what can kill lawns. You have to be careful with that. But compost tea, so we have a 250-gallon brewer. You denature the water by bubbling off all the chlorine, unless you have spring water. Chlorine is the death knell for compost tea. So swimming pools, you get rid of all the crud in the swimming water by adding chlorine. Okay? One thing you don't want to do is kill the crud, because there's lots of really good crud, and that's what we're trying to grow in compost tea. So we have a 250-gallon tank, and then we fill it with 200 gallons of water, and we put the pumps on full blast, and we just bubble a lot of oxygen into that, and you can smell the chlorine coming right out. And in about 40 minutes, you take a piece of litmus paper that has a chlorine tester on it, stick it in the water. If it turns color, keep it on a little bit more. If it doesn't turn color, you got all the chlorine out. Then in the center of this brewer is a stainless steel tea bag, if you will, that's made out of mesh, 100 mesh fabric. And it's about that long and about that big around. And into that mesh bag goes compost of different types, which I'll explain in a minute, and then any kind of amendments that you want to add to the compost early in the brew cycle. And I'll explain that in a minute. Then that goes down in the center of the compost tea brewer, and then a dome, a stainless steel dome, goes over the top, and air gets pumped right into that sock, so that the water that's submerged around the sock gets completely turbulated. So that water and the oxygen starts to etch all of the organisms out of the compost and into a solution. And then at certain times in the brew cycle, and depending on the temperature of the water, you can add things like humic acids, which will grow fungi. You could add simple blackstrap organic molasses. That will grow bacteria. So depending on what you're trying to grow, if you're trying to grow a lawn, you want it slightly bacterial dominant. If you're trying to grow rhododendrons, you want it slightly fungal dominant. If you're trying to grow evergreen trees, you want it heavily fungal dominant. So you wouldn't apply molasses, you'd apply a lot more humic acid. Also, your compost would be made more of wood chips than it would be of straw. Wood chips have a lot more carbon, a lot more lignin, therefore fungi are going to be more in that wood. That's the main decomposer of wood chips, is fungi. So when you rot wood chips down, or partially rot them down, and you put them into a tea brewer, you get more fungi out of it. And then you can grow those fungi exponentially by adding humic acid, which is their food source, one of their food sources. So we use a lot of compost tea. We do bioassay testing. Are you familiar with that? Chemical testing tests like what you can get at UConn or University of Massachusetts. It'll give you pH of the soil. It'll give you nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. It'll give you your levels of trace elements. It'll give you your percent organic matter. It'll give you your cation exchange capacity, which I talked about before, and your percent base saturation. It's a whole bunch of information there you don't need to know. The bioassay, on the other hand, tests just the living component in the soil, only the living biology. So it forgets all about the chemistry and just tests how many bacteria do I have, what kind of bacteria, how many fungi do I have, what kind of fungi, what's the relation to each other. Do I have way more fungi than I do bacteria, way more bacteria than I do fungi? And then you can brew a tea that can match. So I take a soil sample, send it off to this lab. The lab sends me back this bioassay report, and it says, you're trying to grow sugar maples in a soil that has way too much bacteria. So you need to brew a high fungal compost tea. It'll tell me exactly how to do that. So with the materials that we have, different types of materials rotting down, we would use more wood chips and maybe hardwood leaves as the compost for that tea. If we were doing lawn, I'd probably use a lot more straw. Straw is bacterial dominated, has a lot of protozoa in it. Those are a couple of things that you really want in lawn soils. So it's probably as much an art as it is a science, because it's really new. And there's a very controversial person, Elaine Ingham, Dr. Ingham, who has gotten out of academia and is president of the Soil Food Web, Inc. She's made it a business, And a lot of what she says is amazing and really works. Some of what she says cannot be substantiated by other scientists, and they're trying like hell to do this. So you have to be careful. Compost tea can be also snake oil. I know lots of people that apply dirty water and they're calling it compost tea. So it's a very hard thing to do correctly. You need a microscope, you need people that really know what they're doing. So it's not easy. But yeah, that's the cutting edge of where organic is right now. Am I over time?
You're just about right, it's
Okay.
20 after 8,
Anybody else have anything else?
so,
Are you familiar with the Envirothon?
No.
High school kids meet after school, they get touching on soil, water, forestry, wildlife. There's a fifth category that changes every year, but I hope that maybe next spring you could speak to the kids. They have 4.
Springtime for a farmer.
Well, through the winter too.
Much more better. Springtime is totally taboo. But yeah, I would love to. Anything else? Anything I didn't cover? Anything I didn't cover clearly? Yeah, I know, it's probably totally oversaturated, right?
That's great.
And this is just scratching the surface. This is nothing. It's amazing what you can do with biology. And just a little bit of thinking. I hate that term because it's become a cliche, but thinking out of the box. It's really appropriate because engineers like to put things in boxes. Are there any engineers here? There's one. You're a software engineer. Different story. So the whole idea now is going back to the future. So we're going way, way back, and we're looking at the way things were done before all this crazy engineering and lots of money and big excavation equipment. How things were done back then. And try to bring that up to 21st century standards and how to get good results without doing a whole lot of damage in the process. And that's what soft engineering is all about. I'm by no means the founder or an expert at it. I'm a student of it. And a lot of other people have been doing this way longer before me. So I hope that all of us will just think, when you have water, it's an incredible resource, and it could be doing good, it could be doing not so good. Yes?
I'm going to be a little linear here, but what's the next step here? Is there, you mentioned a couple of parks, you mentioned some opportunities to, we have, Green Harbor, the beach, you talk about erosion. It's large portions of it just about every time it rains. It floods, that whole street floods. I don't know if, rain gardens will mitigate that or provide some kind of soft buffer or what. But, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but maybe it's a question of, is there something that we can do to follow?
What's the next step? In that park, I would think that you're not going to alleviate the road flooding by bioswales and rain gardens. If you look carefully at the road, if you do a really careful site analysis, you'll see that where the water puddles, there's a low spot in the pavement. So introducing a lot of water into that is going to have a bigger puddle for a longer period of time. If we can mitigate some of that water and keep it out of the, most of it out of the picnic area, where it never washes across the lawn, down the sidewalk, and onto the street, will help that matter. But I think that little curb cuts that could be made in the stone wall. So you have the road, you have a sidewalk, then you have a stone wall, then the beach. If there could be some way that you could get water into that beach, it's all sand, it's going to percolate right down in. But you don't want it to cause erosion. So there's engineering that has to be done. But as far as that road puddling goes, if you look at it, there's a distinct low spot right there. But some of the water is coming from uphill, and not to implicate anybody because we don't know. There's a big parking lot up above that we checked today, and we followed a lot of the drains and downspouts, and it looks like a lot of the water is being introduced at the edge of the railroad right away, and then it's percolating or leaching into the park. But there's a beautiful site right there where we could intercept that water and probably percolate 80–75% of it.
And it's very visible. Which
Oh, yeah.
is that? it could be a location that could serve as a kind of model or example
Yeah,
of what
I
we
would think
can
some
begin to
signage.
do.
Yep,
Because we've got nothing but shoreline here.
right. Well, if you get grant money to do this, and the next step I was thinking is, if you get grant money to do this, they'll almost always mandate signage to explain how you spent the money and why. And really good pictures are, better than 1,000 words. Also, the other thing I was thinking of is probably volunteerism. I talked to the town engineer, and they're all up in arms about making things that are going to be more maintenance. So, making things that might be more maintenance. So, right, they don't have the manpower that they do have don't have the expertise, they'd have to hire it out, and they're afraid to do that because they've been burned in the past. So this is where that first year, year and a half, we would love to have really good volunteers. I would be happy to come and show you what we do when we seed a meadow or when we seed a rain garden. We take some sterilized soil, and we take a couple of flats and fill it with sterilized soil, and we scatter the seed that we're planting in the meadow or in the rain garden on that sterilized soil, and we cover it in a plastic bag, wet the soil first, cover it in a plastic bag so no contaminant could get in, and then grow that, and then give that to each one of the guys that's going out in the field to do the weeding, because you'll see what the seedlings look like. So you'll have little babies of what's coming up. So you'll be able to better discern what's a weed and what's not. But still the best way is to scratch with your finger and look for the vermiculite in the soil. It's kind of a cheating way, but it really works.
I just want to throw this out to everybody because we have a really good opportunity Saturday morning to recruit volunteers from Connecticut College. And also September 3rd, we have the OBCS fair where we have a possibility to recruit students from Connecticut College. So
I'm pretty good friends with Glenn Dreyer. I don't know if I could pull any strings with him, but I bet you I could get some people. Yeah. And there's some good people there. Some really good people there. Anything else?
Seems great.
Well, I thank you all for coming so much.
Thank you.